My name is Colin Stevenson. This is me giving the explanation of the Assure model for my copyright lesson for 5720. So for A, analyze learners. The learners are high schoolers. That's what I'm familiar with working with. That's what I'm aiming to be a librarian for in the future. So I worked with that audience. They are digital natives, familiar with basic internet navigation. So they're capable of independently sort of moving around and pulling up resources on the internet, and have some level of independence in being able to determine what they need and ability to follow instructions. They would not know much about copyright law, so the basics are pretty important. Just establishing what it really means and what it looks like and where it comes from would be pretty essential. So that's why in the lesson I give some of the basic definitions and sort of walk through the normal, like, general definitions of everything. And they would definitely either be completely indifferent or have outright negative attitudes towards copyright law, because a lot of them would probably see it as something that gets in the way of their ability to actually, do work. And so, as a way to sort of address that, I opened in the presentation with sort of those common questions that they might have that would frustrate them in order to sort of get them ready and willing to accept the actual process of learning what was happening with copyright law. The learning styles would vary greatly for these learners, because in a high school classroom, you would have uh, probably 30 students or so. And among them, they would be all over the place in what their capabilities are. But a majority of them would benefit from hands-on practice, actually doing it for themselves to reflect their growing independence, as well as models, so that, again, they have the independence to check their own work and to sort of follow a pattern. For differently abled students that may be in the classes, templates probably be really useful for them, something where they can sort of plug and place answers or guiding questions, that ask them some things that would lead them towards an understanding of how copyright applies to different things, uh, without totally giving away just what the answer is. Um, Gifted students, however, would need a buy-in to understand the value of it, because especially for those students who like to work fast and get stuff done, they're going to be trying to sort of get through the work as quickly as possible, and they might, if they don't see the value in copyright law, there's a good chance that they would outright ignore that, as that's one of sort of the common identifiers of gifted students is needing to find value in something. And so, in order to do that, it helps to establish that copyright law isn't just some empty law, but that it's made to protect people who create things. And a lot of students today, of course, follow like YouTube stars or people on Twitch, and that sort of understanding that it's those people who are being protected and being able to make their living off of the content they create would help them sort of see kind of that value. For the standards and objectives, one of the Texas essential knowledge and skills states the student is expected to display academic citations, including for paraphrased and quoted text, and use source materials ethically to avoid plagiarism. And in particular, I'm for this, I would be considering the ethical use of source materials. Plagiarism is kind of a part of this, but I know that the focus is on copyright law. And so following copyright law, I think, matches with this idea of being ethical. And so in order to match the need to be ethical, they need to be able to identify the source of information, images, or other materials, so that they understand that just because it's on Google, they don't just copy and paste the image. They actually see who owns it, who created it, who has the right to distribute it. And then being able to quickly identify how in something that they found actually interacts with copyright law. Like if they found something from the public domain, if they can state that it came from the public domain and that copyright doesn't protect it, then they understand how they can use it a little more effectively, or identifying the creator and seeing if they've provided for permissions, and so on and so forth. And demonstrating proper usage according to the above actions, including in usage the idea of fair use. For strategies and resources, there's a lot of stuff online that they could refer to help them out. First up here, we have a video that is a copyright crash course. It's 3 minutes or less, so it's well within that window of sort of keeping teenagers' attention span. With those 6 to 7 minute is that high end. So this would be a really fast sort of overview. It might be good for gifted learners to sort of remind them of what's going on, or give them a more visual look as opposed to the lecture. Here is a more in-depth video for fair use, so that they understand sort of exactly what the process is. That one's more about 8 minutes long, so it starts to push that attention span limit. But for those of them that really want to make sure they're doing it right, this would be a great resource to sort of break it down for them for different types of media that they might use. For the ones that are more verbal learners or don't need sort of the visual cues, there's a written explanation, which might be faster or work better as a reference guide for them. And then again, keeping in mind that they need to recall that they can't simply use this stuff even if they follow copyright law. There's just a quick citation guide for them in keeping with the practice, which is pretty in-depth. And then my presentation as well is linked down there. There's enough, I think, written on it that they could use it as a recall tool. For utilizing resources, the students would have access to each of those things listed above in order to meet their different needs, because some may only need those lighter refreshers, while some may want the written versus the visual and video support. And then all of them will sort of need models for how to cite or give credit to the creators as they are using their works. So requiring learner participation. The students, in the process of this, in order to demonstrate their understanding of copyright law, they will find materials that fit into the different categories of usage. So they will practice locating public domain materials and explaining how they found it or how they know that it's in the public domain, so that they get familiar with that process, which for some of them will be the easiest way and fastest way to follow copyright law. Find an appropriate material and explain how it falls under fair use protections, so that they can demonstrate that if they are using it a certain way, for example, if they maybe picked an audio file, they could demonstrate how they are following fair use as a way of incorporating it into their project. They can find a source with some maybe that they want to use more of that has copyright protections, or if they just find a source just for the sake of practice, to identify how maybe they could request permission for use. That would depend, I suppose, a little bit on district standards for communication. Maybe we wouldn't want to encourage students to do that, but if nothing else, we could demonstrate, or at least have them demonstrate an understanding of how they might go throughout the process. So maybe we have them find a poem from a poet that they particularly enjoy, and see if they can figure out how to find contact information for the poet and what they might include in perhaps an email request for use. And then just again, in keeping in line with the differentiation between following copyright laws and plagiarism, for these three works that they find, they can generate citations in order to appropriately use them. And then for evaluating, they'll be measured in two simple categories: locating a source as it matches those different needs, and explaining how they go about the process. So they can get credit for doing the locating, as well as credit for doing the explanation step. And then for those citations that we're asking them for, we can measure those independently for different levels of information that they have included, as well as the formatting that they take. Next steps can be decided based on the results. So the rubric actually covers a box for fair use, for requesting permission, and for public domain. So they'll have a box for each of those things showing that they've located a source that fits into each of those things, as well as a box identifying or giving credit to them for whether or not they can explain the process. And then citations have a separate thing for appropriate information included, as well as formatting. So this would be how we make sure that after the lesson they are able to actually carry out copyright. And that rubric could be attached to another assignment, or there could be a whole independent assignment on the copyright process.